There was a general the Germans whispered about in the dark. A name that made hardened Wehrmacht commanders check their maps twice. A man who didn't fight wars by the book because he believed the book would get his men killed. They called him Terrible Terry. And when his division rolled into battle, the Germans knew that hell itself was coming with him. This is the story of the most feared, most controversial, and perhaps most misunderstood American general of World War II. A man who saved thousands of lives by breaking every rule in the manual. A man who was fired twice for being too good at killing Germans. His name was Terry de la Mesa Allen, and this is why the enemy feared him more than any other American commander on the battlefield. December 1941. America had just been dragged into the war. While other generals sat in comfortable offices planning strategies on paper, Terry Allen was already a warrior with scars older than most of his soldiers. He was 52 years old, but he moved like a man possessed by something younger, something fiercer. His face was weathered, lined with experiences that would have broken lesser men. He had survived World War I, where he earned the Silver Star for gallantry. He had been wounded multiple times. He knew what it meant to bleed in the mud while politicians made speeches about honor. And now, as America scrambled to build an army that could face the Nazi war machine, they handed him the 1st Infantry Division. The Big Red One. The oldest, proudest division in the American Army. What they didn't know was that they'd just given a loaded gun to a man who believed in one simple philosophy. Audacity wins wars, not caution. Terry Allen didn't look like the generals you see in photographs. He didn't have that polished, portrait-ready appearance. His uniform was often rumpled. He wore a battered old helmet instead of the officer's cap. He carried a riding crop, not as an affectation, but because he'd been a cavalry officer and old habits die hard. He chain-smoked Lucky Strikes and his voice was gravelly from years of shouting orders over artillery fire. But it was his eyes that told you everything. They were the eyes of a man who had seen death up close and decided he wasn't afraid of it anymore. His soldiers loved him because he didn't send them anywhere he wouldn't go himself. His superiors feared him because he refused to sacrifice men for glory or political gain. And the Germans? The Germans learned to fear him because when Terry Allen attacked, he didn't stop until there was nothing left to attack. In 1942, the 1st Infantry Division was preparing for Operation Torch, the Allied invasion of North Africa. This would be America's first major offensive against the Axis powers. The stakes couldn't have been higher. The British had been fighting in the desert for years. They were exhausted, stretched thin. If the Americans failed, if they showed weakness, the entire Allied strategy could collapse. Most generals approached this moment with careful planning, conservative tactics, playing it safe. Not Terry Allen. He looked at the invasion plans and saw opportunities where others saw risks. He studied Rommel's tactics, the legendary desert fox who had humiliated the British again and again. And Allen realized something crucial. Rommel won because he was unpredictable, because he attacked when others would defend, because he moved faster than anyone thought possible. So Allen decided to beat Rommel at his own game. November 8, 1942. The beaches of Algeria. The Big Red One hit the shore like a thunderstorm. But this wasn't a clean, organized invasion like the planners had hoped. It was chaos. The landing craft were scattered. Equipment was lost in the surf. French colonial forces, nominally allied with the Vichy government, opened fire. Young American soldiers, many seeing combat for the first time, found themselves pinned down on hostile beaches thousands of miles from home. This was the moment that would define everything. A lesser commander would have consolidated, dug in, waited for reinforcements and clear orders. Terry Allen grabbed his pistol and walked straight into the gunfire. He moved from position to position, rallying his men, cursing at them when they hesitated, praising them when they advanced. He didn't lead from behind. He led from the front, where the bullets were thickest. And his men, seeing their general refuse to take cover, found courage they didn't know they had. Within hours, Allen's division had secured their objectives. While other units struggled and stalled, the Big Red One pushed inland. Allen didn't give the enemy time to organize, time to prepare defenses. He kept attacking, kept moving, kept the pressure relentless. The French forces, seeing this American general who fought like a demon, quickly negotiated a ceasefire. But Allen barely paused. He knew the real enemy was still out there. The Germans were in Tunisia, and they were preparing to make the Americans pay for every inch of North African soil. Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox himself, was waiting. And he was about to meet the one American general who wouldn't be intimidated by his reputation. The Germans had a name for the 1st Infantry Division before they ever faced them in battle. They called them the Bloody First because of the red number 1 on their shoulder patches. But after meeting Terry Allen in combat, that nickname took on a darker meaning. Allen's tactics were unlike anything the Germans had encountered from the Americans. He used speed and aggression in ways that seemed reckless, but were actually brilliantly calculated. He would feint an attack in one direction, then hit hard from another angle. He kept his forces mobile, never staying in one position long enough for German artillery to zero in. He attacked at night, at dawn, during sandstorms, whenever the Germans least expected it. Most importantly, he trusted his junior officers and enlisted men to make decisions in the heat of battle, creating a flexible, responsive force that could adapt faster than the rigid German command structure. At the Battle of Kasserine Pass in February 1943, the American army suffered its first major defeat in the European theater. Rommel's Afrika Korps smashed through inexperienced American units, sending them fleeing in panic. Tanks were abandoned. Equipment was left behind. Officers lost control of their men. It was a disaster that could have broken American morale completely. The entire Allied command was in crisis. But there was one division that didn't break. The Big Red One under Terry Allen held their ground. While others retreated, Allen's men dug in and fought with a ferocity that stunned the Germans. Allen personally directed artillery fire, moved units to plug gaps in the line, and refused to give up an inch more ground than absolutely necessary. His stand bought time for other American forces to regroup and reorganize. More importantly, it showed the Germans that not all American soldiers would run when faced with the legendary Afrika Korps. After Kasserine, the American army was reorganized. General George Patton, already famous for his aggressive style, was brought in to shake up the defeated units. But Patton didn't need to shake up Terry Allen. If anything, Allen was too aggressive for even Patton's taste. The two men were similar in many ways, both cavalrymen, both believers in audacious tactics, both contemptuous of by-the-book warfare. But they clashed immediately. Patton wanted obedience and discipline. Allen wanted results and flexibility. Patton wore his uniform with meticulous precision and demanded his men do the same. Allen looked like he'd slept in his uniform and didn't care if his men shaved as long as they could fight. The tension between them would simmer throughout the African campaign, two alpha predators circling each other, united only by their shared hatred of the Germans. In March 1943, Allen's Big Red One spearheaded the attack at El Getter. This was crucial. The Americans needed a clear victory to restore confidence, to prove they could beat the Germans in a straight fight. Allen studied the terrain, the German positions, their likely responses. Then he designed a battle plan that was vintage Terry Allen. Hit them hard, hit them fast, and don't let up. His artillery barrage was devastating. His infantry advanced with coordinated precision. His armor exploited every breakthrough. The Germans counterattacked with their feared Tiger tanks and Panzer divisions, the same forces that had terrorized the British for years. But Allen was ready. He had positioned anti-tank guns in hidden positions. He had artillery pre-sighted on the German approach routes. When the panzers came, they rolled into a killing field. The Battle of El Getter was a stunning American victory. Terry Allen had proven that American soldiers, properly led, could not only fight the Germans, they could beat them decisively. But victory came with a cost that haunted Allen. War is not a chess game where pieces are simply removed from the board. Every German tank destroyed meant young men burned alive inside. Every artillery barrage meant bodies torn apart, lives ended in screaming chaos. Allen knew this intimately. He visited the wounded in field hospitals. He wrote letters to the families of the dead. He carried the weight of every decision, every order that sent men into danger. This was what separated him from the armchair strategist. He never forgot that war is measured in human suffering, not just territorial gains. And this empathy, this refusal to treat soldiers as expendable resources, made his men fight harder for him. They knew their general valued their lives, that he wouldn't waste them on pointless objectives or ego-driven offensives. As the North African campaign ground toward its conclusion, the Germans were trapped in Tunisia. The Allies pressed from all sides. The Axis forces, once seemingly invincible, were running out of supplies, running out of time. In May 1943, 250,000 German and Italian soldiers surrendered. It was a catastrophic defeat for the Axis powers. And throughout that final campaign, Terry Allen's 1st Infantry Division was at the tip of the spear, driving forward, giving the enemy no rest, no chance to escape. The Germans had learned a bitter lesson. There was one American general who fought with the same ruthless efficiency as their own best commanders. A general who couldn't be intimidated, couldn't be outmaneuvered, couldn't be stopped. They began to ask their intelligence officers, "Where is Allen's division? Where is the Big Red One?" Because wherever Terry Allen appeared on the battlefield, German casualties followed. July 1943. The invasion of Sicily. Operation Husky. The Allies were now striking at what Churchill called the soft underbelly of Europe. Sicily was defended by Italian troops and German divisions. The terrain was mountainous, perfect for defense, nightmarish for attackers. Once again, the Big Red One was chosen for the most difficult assignment. They would land at Gela, a heavily defended beach, then push inland before the Germans could organize a counterattack. Allen looked at the plan and saw all the ways it could go wrong. But he also saw opportunity. If they moved fast enough, if they were ruthless enough, they could crack Sicily open like an egg. The landing at Gela was hell. The naval bombardment had failed to knock out the Italian coastal defenses. Machine gun fire raked the beaches. Soldiers stumbled through the surf carrying 80-pound packs, struggling not to drown while bullets kicked up water around them. Landing craft were hit and sank, taking men to the bottom before they ever reached shore. This was D-Day before D-Day, a brutal amphibious assault that tested every lesson learned in North Africa. And once again Terry Allen was there, wading through the water with his men, his riding crop in one hand and a cigarette somehow still lit in his mouth. He organized the chaos through sheer force of personality, turning a scattered landing into a coherent assault. Within hours, the Big Red One had secured Gela. But the real battle was just beginning. German intelligence had identified the American landing. They were sending panzer divisions to crush the beachhead before it could be reinforced. Tiger tanks, the most feared weapons in the German arsenal, were rolling toward Gela. If they reached the beach, they would massacre the lightly armed infantry. This was the crisis moment. Most commanders would have called for naval gunfire support, would have waited for reinforcements, would have prepared a defense. Terry Allen ordered an attack. He sent his men forward to meet the panzers head-on, using every tactic he could devise. Anti-tank guns positioned in ambush. Bazookas fired from buildings. Artillery called down with pinpoint accuracy. And most audaciously, he personally led a charge with his infantry straight at the German armor, betting that the tankers wouldn't expect such insane aggression. It worked. The German attack stalled, shocked by the ferocity of the American defense. The panzers, which should have rolled over the beachhead, found themselves in a grinding battle of attrition. Allen kept his men attacking, kept the Germans off balance. Naval destroyers moved dangerously close to shore and added their guns to the fight. The sky filled with smoke and the screaming of shells. For 2 days the battle hung in the balance. German commanders threw everything they had at Gela, determined to drive the Americans back into the sea. But Terry Allen wouldn't budge. His men fought with desperate courage, knowing their general was right there with them, refusing to retreat. Finally, after suffering catastrophic losses, the Germans withdrew. The beachhead was secure. Sicily would fall to the Allies. But even in victory, Terry Allen was making enemies. His division had developed a reputation for being undisciplined when they weren't fighting. His men drank heavily. They brawled with military police. They ignored regulations about saluting and proper uniform. Allen didn't care. He believed that soldiers needed to blow off steam between battles, that enforcing petty rules was a waste of time compared to training men to kill Germans efficiently. But his superiors cared very much. The army ran on discipline and order. Allen's division was effective but chaotic, brilliant but uncontrollable. Generals like Omar Bradley, methodical and by the book, saw Allen as a problem. Even Patton, for all his bluster, believed in strict discipline when soldiers weren't in combat. Terry Allen was becoming too independent, too defiant of authority. He had won battles, yes. But he had also created a division that was fiercely loyal to him personally, rather than to the army command structure. That made him dangerous in a different way. In August 1943, after Sicily was secured, Terry Allen was relieved of command. The official reason was vague, something about needing fresh leadership. But everyone knew the truth. Allen had been too successful, too popular with his men, too willing to defy orders he thought were stupid. He had embarrassed other generals by showing that audacity and flexibility could achieve what their careful planning could not. The Big Red One, the division he had molded into one of the finest fighting forces in the American army, was taken away from him. His soldiers were devastated. Many wept openly when they heard their general was leaving. They had followed him through North Africa and Sicily. They had watched him share their dangers, their hardships. And now he was being punished for winning too well. Terry Allen could have retired. He was 53 years old. He had earned multiple Silver Stars, the Distinguished Service Cross, and the respect of every soldier who had served under him. He could have gone home, written his memoirs, given speeches about his glory days. But that wasn't who Terry Allen was. Being fired didn't break him. Made him angry. And Terry Allen, angry and determined to prove his worth, was a dangerous thing. He went back to the United States and took command of a division that everyone had written off as hopeless. The 104th Infantry Division. The Timberwolves. They were green troops, untested, poorly trained. Other officers didn't want them. But Allen saw potential. He saw young men who could be forged into warriors if someone believed in them. He saw a chance for redemption. 4 months, Allen trained the Timberwolves with everything he had learned from years of combat. He taught them to move fast, to think independently, to be aggressive. He taught them that the best defense is a relentless offense. He shared with them the hard lessons of North Africa and Sicily, paid for in blood by the Big Red One. He transformed them from a mediocre division into a fighting force that would make the Germans regret ever hearing the name Timberwolves. In October 1944, Allen led his new division into combat in Europe. They landed in France and immediately pushed into the grinding battles of the Western Front. And once again Terry Allen showed everyone why the Germans had feared him. The Timberwolves fought through Belgium and into Germany itself. Allen drove them hard, but no harder than he drove himself. At an age when most men were contemplating retirement, he was still on the front lines, still leading from the front, still refusing to ask his men to do anything he wouldn't do himself. The Germans, recognizing Allen's tactics, once again found themselves facing an American general who didn't fight by the comfortable rules of attrition warfare. He hit them when they expected defense. He defended when they expected retreat. He was unpredictable, adaptable, and absolutely ruthless in exploiting any weakness. The Timberwolves helped capture Aachen, the first German city to fall to the Allies. It was brutal urban combat, house to house, room to room. The kind of fighting that destroys divisions and breaks men's spirits. But Allen had prepared his soldiers for this. They fought with skill and determination, clearing the city block by bloody block. The Germans defended fanatically, every building a fortress, every street a killing ground. But Allen kept pushing, kept attacking, refusing to let the Germans rest or regroup. When Aachen finally fell, the symbolic victory was enormous. The Third Reich's territory had been breached. And Terry Allen had proven once again that he could take the most difficult objectives, win the hardest battles. But what truly made Terry Allen feared by the Germans wasn't just his tactical brilliance or his aggressive style. It was something deeper, something psychological. Allen understood that war is fundamentally about breaking the enemy's will to fight. You don't win by occupying territory or destroying equipment. You win by convincing the enemy that resistance is hopeless, that every battle will be a defeat, that death or surrender are their only options. Allen created that sense of inevitability. When German soldiers learned they were facing one of Allen's divisions, morale plummeted. Intelligence reports captured from German units mentioned Allen by name, warned about his tactics, tried to prepare troops for the unconventional warfare he would bring. But preparation didn't help. Allen was always one step ahead, always doing something unexpected. There's a story, perhaps apocryphal but widely believed by soldiers who served under him, that captures the essence of Terry Allen. During one battle in Germany, a young lieutenant came to Allen's command post to report that his men were pinned down by heavy fire and couldn't advance. Allen looked at him and asked a simple question, "Are you dead?" The lieutenant, confused, said no. Allen replied, "Then you're not pinned down. You're just stopped. Get back there and start moving." That was Terry Allen in a nutshell. He refused to accept limitations, refused to acknowledge that something was impossible. His men absorbed that attitude. They began to believe they could accomplish anything if they pushed hard enough, if they were bold enough. And that belief became reality on battlefield after battlefield. The war in Europe ended in May 1945. Nazi Germany, the seemingly invincible Third Reich, lay in ruins. Millions had died. Cities were destroyed. The political map of the world had been redrawn. And through it all, through North Africa and Sicily and France and Germany itself, Terry Allen had been there, fighting, leading, refusing to quit. He had been fired for being too good at his job. He had been given a second chance with a division nobody wanted. And he had proven that leadership, real leadership, isn't about following rules or looking impressive in uniform. It's about bringing men home alive while accomplishing the mission. It's about sharing danger rather than directing it from safety. It's about caring more about results than reputation. After the war, Terry Allen finally retired. He was exhausted, worn down by years of combat and the weight of command. He had survived when so many hadn't. He had watched young men die under his command, carried that guilt every day. But he had also saved thousands of lives by refusing to waste his soldiers in pointless attacks. By being aggressive and unpredictable, He had kept the Germans off balance, unable to prepare effective defenses. His unconventional tactics had shortened battles, reduced casualties, achieved objectives that other generals thought impossible. The same qualities that got him fired had made him one of the most effective combat commanders in American history. The Germans, in their post-war analysis, identified several American generals as particularly dangerous. Patton was obvious with his famous pursuit across France. Bradley was respected for his steady competence. Eisenhower was acknowledged as a brilliant organizer and coalition leader. But when German officers were asked which American general they least wanted to face in battle, many of them named Terry Allen. Because Patton was predictable in his aggression. Bradley was careful and methodical. Eisenhower rarely commanded in the field. But Terry Allen was different. He was unpredictable. He couldn't be intimidated. He was willing to take risks that terrified his own superiors. And most importantly, he was personally present on the battlefield, leading from the front, making decisions in real time with perfect understanding of the tactical situation. That combination made him uniquely dangerous. Terry Allen died in 1969, at the age of 79. He never wrote the memoirs that could have made him famous to a broader public. He didn't seek glory or recognition. He had spent his life doing what he believed was right, and he was content with that. The soldiers who served under him in the Big Red One and the Timberwolves never forgot him. They told stories about terrible Terry, about his riding crop and his lucky strikes, about the way he cursed at them when they hesitated and praised them when they succeeded. They remembered a general who treated them like human beings worth protecting, not like chess pieces to be sacrificed. And they knew, even if the history books sometimes overlooked it, that Terry Allen was the kind of leader who appears once in a generation, a warrior scholar who understood both the art and the horror of war. Why was Terry Allen the most feared American general by the Germans during World War II? Because he combined tactical brilliance with personal courage, strategic vision with ground-level awareness, aggressive offense with genuine care for his soldiers' lives. Because he refused to fight the war the way others expected, instead constantly adapting and innovating. Because he led from the front, sharing every danger he asked his men to face. Because he couldn't be broken by defeat or corrupted by victory. Because when he was fired, he came back stronger and more determined. Because he turned a written-off division into an elite fighting force through sheer force of will and brilliant training. Because he understood that in war, audacity and speed can save more lives than caution and careful planning. The lesson of Terry Allen isn't about glorifying war. War is horror, suffering, death. It destroys lives and families and cities. The lesson is about leadership in the darkest circumstances. It's about maintaining your principles when everyone tells you to compromise. It's about caring for the people under your command, treating them as precious rather than expendable. It's about having the courage to do what's right even when it costs you personally. Terry Allen was fired for being too independent, too aggressive, too unwilling to sacrifice his men for the convenience of higher command. He was punished for winning the wrong way. And yet he persevered, proved his worth again, and left a legacy that lasted long after the medals and promotions of more conventional officers were forgotten. But there's more to understand about why the Germans specifically feared Terry Allen above so many other capable American commanders. It wasn't just about battlefield victories. The German military machine was built on certain assumptions, certain principles that had served them well in Poland, in France, in the early years of the Soviet campaign. They understood how conventional armies operated. They could predict how most generals would respond to specific situations. Their doctrine, their training, their entire military culture was designed to counter predictable enemy behavior. Terry Allen shattered those assumptions. He fought in ways that violated German expectations at every turn, creating a psychological warfare effect that went far beyond mere tactical success. Consider what the Germans expected from American forces. They saw America as a nation of industrialists and merchants, not warriors. They believed American soldiers were soft, undisciplined, more interested in comfort than combat. Early encounters at Kasserine Pass seemed to confirm these prejudices. But then came Terry Allen, and suddenly the Germans faced Americans who fought with a ferocity and unpredictability that contradicted everything they thought they knew. German after-action reports from battles against Allen's divisions show a pattern of confusion and frustration. Officers complained that American attacks came from unexpected directions at unexpected times, with unexpected force. The careful defensive preparations that worked against British forces often proved useless against Allen's unorthodox approaches. There's a specific incident that illustrates this perfectly. During the Sicily campaign, German intelligence intercepted American radio communications and believed they had pinpointed the location of Allen's command post. They organized a raid to capture or kill him, a decapitation strike that could have thrown the entire American offensive into chaos. Elite German paratroopers were sent on this mission, men who had conducted similar successful operations in Crete and other theaters. They approached the suspected location with perfect tactical precision, only to discover that Allen had moved his headquarters hours earlier. But here's where it gets interesting. Allen had anticipated the possibility of such a raid. He had left behind a skeleton force with strict orders to make noise, create the illusion of continued presence. When the German paratroopers attacked what they thought was the command post, they walked into a carefully prepared ambush. Allen had turned their own aggression against them. The raid was decimated. The survivors who were captured told interrogators they couldn't believe an American general had outthought them so completely. This incident spread through German ranks like wildfire. It became a cautionary tale. Terry Allen wasn't just another enemy commander to be respected. He was someone who thought like they did, who understood aggression and deception and psychological warfare at a level they hadn't expected from Americans. German officers began to study his tactics, trying to find patterns, trying to predict his moves. But Allen was always evolving, always trying new approaches. What worked for him in North Africa, he wouldn't rely on in Sicily. What succeeded in Sicily, he modified for the European campaign. He was a constant student of warfare, learning from every battle, incorporating new ideas, discarding tactics that became predictable. His relationship with his soldiers created another element of German fear. Most armies operate on a hierarchical structure where orders flow down and obedience flows up. Soldiers are expected to follow commands without question, to be interchangeable parts in a military machine. The German army perfected this system. But Allen's divisions operated differently. He empowered his junior officers and even his enlisted men to make tactical decisions in the moment. If a sergeant saw an opportunity during a battle, he had the authority to exploit it without waiting for orders to filter down through layers of command. This created a responsive, adaptive force that could react to changing battlefield conditions faster than any rigid command structure could manage. The Germans found this absolutely bewildering. They would create what they thought was a solid defensive line, only to have it cracked open by some corporal or lieutenant who saw a weakness and attacked on his own initiative. They would prepare for an assault from one direction based on standard military doctrine, then get hit from 3 different angles simultaneously because Allen's subordinate commanders had the freedom and training to coordinate without central direction. It was like fighting not one organized army but dozens of smaller forces, each capable of independent action but all working toward the same objective. German officers, trained in rigid Prussian military tradition, simply didn't know how to counter this fluid, decentralized style of warfare. There's another dimension to Allen's effectiveness that often gets overlooked in purely military analysis. He understood morale not just for his own troops but for the enemy as well. He knew that soldiers don't fight for abstract causes. They fight for their comrades, for survival, for the hope of going home. When those hopes are systematically destroyed, when every battle brings defeat, when casualties mount without any corresponding gains, even the most disciplined army begins to crack. Allen specialized in creating that sense of hopelessness in his enemies. His relentless attacks, his refusal to give ground once taken, his habit of pursuing defeated enemy forces instead of letting them retreat and regroup, all of these tactics wore down German morale in ways that inflicted psychological damage beyond the physical casualties. Captured German soldiers from units that had faced Allen's divisions told remarkably similar stories during interrogation. They spoke of feeling hunted, of never having time to rest or recover, of watching their comrades fall in battle after battle with no relief in sight. They described Allen's forces as relentless, inhuman in their determination. One captured German officer said something particularly revealing. He stated that fighting against most American units felt like a professional military operation. Win or lose, both sides following understood rules of engagement. But fighting against Allen's divisions felt like being in a street fight with no rules, where the opponent would do anything to win. That psychological edge, that impression of facing an enemy who would never stop, never quit, never show mercy, broke German units before the first shot was even fired. Allen also understood the importance of intelligence and reconnaissance in ways that gave him critical advantages. He didn't just rely on official intelligence reports from higher command. He personally interrogated prisoners when time allowed. He talked to local civilians, to resistance fighters, to anyone who might have information about German positions or plans. He sent out constant patrols to probe enemy lines, to find weak points, to gather real-time information about enemy movements. This gave him a clearer picture of the battlefield than his German counterparts often had. While German commanders were working from maps and scheduled reports, Allen was operating on fresh intelligence, sometimes only hours old. That information advantage allowed him to strike when and where the Germans were weakest, to avoid their strengths, to keep them constantly reacting instead of acting. His personal bravery created another psychological effect on German forces. Word spread through German lines that this American general personally led attacks, that he could be found on the front lines during the heaviest fighting. In the rigid German military hierarchy, generals commanded from well-protected headquarters, far from actual combat. The idea of an enemy general exposing himself to direct fire seemed either insane or incredibly dangerous. If Allen was willing to risk death alongside his men, what did that say about the determination of his entire force? German soldiers facing Allen's divisions couldn't comfort themselves with the thought that they were fighting reluctant conscripts led by distant, comfortable officers. They were facing true believers, led by a man who clearly didn't fear death. That psychological reality made every engagement more terrifying. Consider also the timing of Allen's career peak. He was doing his most effective work in 1943 and 1944, precisely when the tide of the war was turning against Germany. The invincibility myth of the Wehrmacht was cracking. Stalingrad had been a catastrophe. North Africa was lost. Italy was invaded. The Eastern Front was collapsing. German soldiers were tired, stretched thin, facing enemies on multiple fronts. Into this moment of German vulnerability came Terry Allen, a general who seemed to embody everything the Germans feared about America's industrial might and manpower finally being applied with tactical sophistication. He wasn't just winning battles. He was demonstrating that American forces, properly led, could match or exceed German military prowess. That realization demoralized German troops who had been raised on propaganda about Aryan superiority and the weakness of democratic societies. The contrast between Allen and other American generals also played into German fears. When facing commanders like Bradley, the Germans knew what to expect. Careful preparation, overwhelming force applied systematically, methodical advances. When facing Patton, they knew to expect aggressive armored thrusts and rapid exploitation of breakthroughs. But Allen? He might do any of these things or none of them or something completely unexpected. That unpredictability created constant stress for German commanders, forcing them to prepare for multiple scenarios simultaneously, spreading their forces thin, never able to concentrate their strength because they didn't know where Allen would strike next. After the war, during the extensive debriefings and historical analysis, German generals were asked to assess Allied commanders. Their assessments of Allen were remarkably consistent. They described him as the most dangerous type of enemy, one who combined professional military skill with absolute ruthlessness in pursuit of objectives. They noted that he seemed to have no ego investment in particular tactics, willing to abandon any approach that wasn't working and try something new. They remarked on his ability to maintain offensive pressure even when his own forces were exhausted, somehow finding reserves of strength when conventional wisdom said his divisions should be spent. Most tellingly, they admitted that they never found an effective counter to his style of warfare. Every defensive scheme they tried, Allen found a way around or through. That's the real story of terrible Terry Allen, the general the Germans learned to fear above all others. Not because he won more battles than anyone else, not because he had more resources or better equipment, but because he fought with an intensity and unpredictability that shattered German expectations and broke their will to resist. He proved that in war the human element, leadership, courage, adaptability, matters more than any material advantage. He showed that a general who truly cares about his soldiers, who shares their dangers and respects their lives, can forge them into a force far greater than the sum of its parts. And he demonstrated, battle after battle, that audacity combined with intelligence creates opportunities that caution never will. That's why his name still resonates among military historians, why soldiers who served under him never forgot what he taught them about courage and leadership, and why 75 years after the war ended, we're still telling the story of the most feared American general of World War II.